The last guest for today, and last but not least, Professor Maloof. I'm going to call him Professor. I'll go with that. No, Michael Maloof. There we are. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing okay this morning?
So far, so good.
Good. I'm glad that you could join me.
Thank you.
I just had a conversation with John Kiriakou. And in the conversation with John,
Friend of mine.
yeah, he's cool people. He's good people, right? I asked him about, I was like, hey, you were in the Bush administration. What are the chances of a president being maneuvered, basically being managed or having information filtered, especially with the entire conversation about whether or not Donald Trump is getting all the information? And he pointed me out to this just astonishing scene where Tenet is going to Bush so George Bush can sign the torture document. Basically, yes, I, George Bush, am agreeing with the torture program that I'm going to call the Hens interrogation. And that Dick Cheney meets him, says, hey, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to see the president. I have the torture document. And Cheney is like, well, I'll take it to him. And Tenet was like, well, no, he's expecting me. And Cheney was like, I will take it to him. Like Darth Vader, like asserts himself. And Tenet's like, okay, here you go. And as John points out, several years later, like 8 years later, come to find out, it is very possible that George Bush didn't realize that he signed a torture document. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's possible, I suppose, even though George Bush put in his book, I say, hell yeah, waterboard him. But people have pointed out that George Bush seemed to have put that in after the fact because he didn't want to look like an asshole for effectively not reading what he was signing when he was signing it by Dick Cheney. And Dick Cheney might have just said, oh, here's a document we need you to sign for so-and-so and so-and-so, not telling him exactly what was in the document. I just have a hard time believing that they didn't talk about it in advance. And in talking about it in advance, didn't bring up the fact that we are going to call this enhanced interrogation as opposed to, breaking people.
Well, there are many, many stories just like that. Basically, it's my premise based upon my own experiences in the Defense Department at that time that the intelligence community, basically George Tenet in particular, who was a Democrat, basically set up George Bush for failure in Iraq. And it coming out with this whole WMD fiasco, when they originated the intelligence, it wasn't us. And then pushing that down and then making Colin Powell say it before the UN, when we knew, some of us knew that operationally Iraq did not have WMD, and I would send up emails or memos to that effect at the time. I was in the office of the Secretary of Defense, and so and then I got ostracized because I wasn't a team player. My job was to analyze terrorist groups worldwide, but my office also looked at export controls of items that ultimately had gone to Iraq. We knew where the R&D centers were. We knew where all of the we had done prior to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the entire WMD networking for Iraq, which was ultimately destroyed in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then was crisscrossed for 10 years by inspectors. So we knew they had not, and we would occasionally stop stuff that was going into Iraq for a potential WMD program, and we would get that halted. And so we had confidence that the WMD didn't exist. Yet George Tenet comes in October of 2002 with this NIE saying there's weapons of mass destruction, and the next thing we know, he's telling Bush the information's a slam dunk. We're saying, what information? You don't have any concrete information.
But from my understanding, everything that I've read has pointed out that Dick Cheney was pushing the CIA to cherry pick information like literally cherry picking information. I mean, that goes to the whole Valerie Plame. What is it? Valerie Plame, I believe her name is. Her husband, who was looking at yellow cake uranium in
Yeah.
Africa and all stuff, basically saying there is no yellow cake and uranium coming out of Africa in this way.
Well, we were getting that information from the CIA.
Yes.
We were getting that information from the agency. It wasn't made up by DIA. It wasn't made up by the Defense Department.
I guess what I'm getting at is, correct me if I'm wrong, the agency pulls information and correlates it based on what the president wants, or for that matter, what someone in the administration wants. There were even reports that Dick Cheney had his own shadow government running with information in order to cherry pick and choose what he wanted to take versus what he didn't want to take.
I was involved in briefing one of Cheney's people in the Pentagon on what we had seen in terms of terrorist groups, but not on WMD at the time. I mean, my office had done sufficient amount of information of export controls over the years, and had developed a body of information to know where the WMD was. Prior to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, my office was involved with Customs in raiding the offices down in Florida of a guy from Chile who lived in Florida and was working on Saddam Hussein's WMD programs. And we were able to shut that office down. We pulled all of his information. We were able to use it basically for targeting. We knew where all the targets were. DIA would come to my office for the targeting information in many respects.
Wow.
So it wasn't originating from the intelligence community. Is what we had gotten with Customs and law enforcement, and in terms of trying to determine what facilities were engaged in WMD programs, and those became prime targets during Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
What are the chances that the president information going to him is being filtered?
Oh, it's totally. Oh yeah, but when information, you get a good analyst. I mean, I saw it when I worked the Toshiba case years ago, and that's what that case involved, discovering that the then Soviets had stolen stolen machine tools to make highly skewed propellers to silence their submarines. Well, we found that out, and we were able to stop any further exports to that location. But as the case went from intelligence to a policy issue, then even CIA became much more engaged and involved in it, because it affected their assets in the field. And it also had an impact on our foreign policy aspects, because we almost brought down the Japanese government as a result of that case. It was a scandal extraordinary.
Right.
Extraordinaire. It became a real scandal. Almost brought down the government. I had the head of Toshiba Machine Tool threatening suicide out of shame. And seppuku.
Are you serious?
As a heart attack.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I mean, these are the kinds of things we would encounter in our day-to-day jobs.
Just wow. Just wow. Okay, so if the president is getting filtered information,
yeah,
why? As I pointed out,
and that gets to today. What happened just the other day?
Right. Exactly. That's what
I went crazy over it. I went on RT. I was on Sputnik about it, because it's like history repeating itself, thanks to the intelligence community filtering the information and not informing the commander in chief. And that instance had to do with when Trump was on the tarmac on a briefing, or an impromptu press briefing, and he was asked the question. I mean, he was complaining about Putin lobbing missiles into into Ukraine. And nobody until some reporter asked, well, were you aware that Putin's helicopter was caught up in a swarm of drones heading toward Moscow? He said, no, I'm not. I wasn't aware of that. I mean, and days, there had been days separating the time of that swarm and that briefing, that impromptu press conference that he had, which tells me the intelligence community gave him one side of this story, but not the whole story. The critical story, which was the fact that it was in retaliation. And this was also in conjunction with the mainstream media. Mainstream media didn't report Peshkov's comments that it was in retaliation, did not report that for another 3 to 5 days.
But they never do.
So this is serious.
But they shouldn't have to rely on mainstream media. Meaning, you would think the president would be more informed than mainstream media.
But he was not getting it in his daily presidential briefs. He should have.
Yeah.
That this was in retaliation, and that Ukraine had launched a swarm, almost hit, and probably was aimed at the helicopter that Putin was in, which was contrary to an understanding and agreement that both sides had, that you don't shoot down the plane of the leadership of the other.
But it's very possible that the intelligence that they used in order to even target Putin in that was coming out of the West.
Oh, it absolutely was. Sure. Either from the UK, the French, or the US, or a combination. Yeah, right. They knew about where that helicopter was going to be because the swarm occurred at that time.
Exactly. It's precisely my point. So Trump doesn't have control of his own government.
That's correct. Now the question is, why didn't Tulsi Gabbard have that installed in his briefing? I mean, this is another potential intelligence failure where Trump could have ordered all kinds of sanctions and this and that, not having the other side of the story. He didn't have the full story.
He would have done that? I mean, because we've seen Trump do this on more than one occasion. If you remember when they had the 30-day ceasefire on energy targets. Okay, well, Trump didn't see, I'm very skeptical about what Trump knows and what Trump says about whether or not it's in any association with reality. So I don't know if Trump was briefed. I don't know if Trump was just lying. I don't know if the information is being filtered because
he had sufficient information to know that Russia had sending missiles, that had sent missiles into Kyiv with the largest overnight onslaught to date.
Yeah.
Not knowing that it was in retaliation for the swarm that Kyiv had sent the day before.
I guess what I'm getting at is, how do you know he didn't know?
He admitted it on the tarmac. He said, I had not heard that.
Was he talking to Xi Jinping?
He doesn't read his intelligence. And he only listens to what people tell him. He doesn't read the stuff. He doesn't sit there and study it. That's too much trouble. He goes by what people tell him, and he reacts to what the last person told him. That's what we're concerned about. Some of us are. And there's a pattern of behavior in this way that I'm now seeing.
Yeah.
And we're in a very precarious time. And he's got to be much more astute. And that's why I suggested even on the air the other day that Putin needs to call Trump directly on the hotline. They got a hotline, and to explain what's going on. Since Trump only listens to the reacts only to the last person he spoke to, well, call him. Don't bother to have it read in your presidential daily brief, in your PDB. Don't bother with that because you don't read it anyway. But once again, why didn't the DNI report that? And the answer is that about 80 to 90% of the DNI's office which is Tulsi Gabbard's, comes from CIA.
Yeah.
They have an agenda, and that is being very anti-Russian, pro-Ukraine.
So you're saying this is the deep state. This is
Oh,
not.
in living color, man. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
yeah. I mean, and in combination with the neocons and the mainstream media, they're all coalescing around him now, boxing him in once again. And frankly, I think he's being overwhelmed. Trump, I think, is being overwhelmed because now those forces are coalescing. Why does he keep on Kellogg, who's very pro-Ukrainian? I mean, it's just unbelievable.
He
I
hired.
can't figure it out, huh?
People. We are looking at this through very different lenses. People of policy. Donald Trump hired those people around him. If he's hiring Rubio, if he's hiring Kellogg, if he's hiring whatever that goofball.
Well, they're all neocons. They're all neocons. Maybe there's no one else in town except for a few other of us. And he don't. Why doesn't he hire McGregor?
Why does he have a Maloof?
I would turn it down.
You turn the job. You turn the job down for real.
In a heartbeat.
You're supposed to do it for America. It's a calling, right?
Yeah,
I guess
I'm not expecting any knock on the door. Let's put it that way. But you know, I don't know why he doesn't. McGregor would be a very good balance in all of this. Why? Maybe McGregor doesn't want the job either, because he knows what, as I do, what we would be getting into. It would be all these sharks swimming around you day in, day out, as we used to encounter when we were in the system.
There is one other potential, that Trump is not who you think he is. Meaning, Trump might have just lied on the tarmac. And
no, he said it so spontaneously. It sounded truthful.
It just came across truthful.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess from my point of view is Trump hired these people. He hired these people for a reason, people of policy. Yeah. And maybe in his mind, I need to balance out my administration. Maybe I have to put a show that I'm not so in the pro-Putin camp.
I don't dispute that. He has surrounded himself with these folks because he wants to hear their opinion, but he makes the ultimate decision. But if they're not giving him the critical information in the first place, that's serious.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there's got to be more direct contact between the strategic leaders of Putin and Trump directly. Bypass the intelligence community.
Well, see, I think Trump's problem is that he doesn't want to be seen as being too close to Putin, especially.
That was fair for the first administration when he was under the gun and being accused of collusion. But that issue has dissipated. Now we're dealing with something that's more real. He has to deal with Putin to try and resolve a war that he wants to resolve and get on with more of a geostrategic relationship, which Russia is necessary for a variety of reasons. But we got to get beyond this Ukrainian problem, and the people within the agency that are hell bent on isolating, containing Russia, if not trying to overthrow the government.
I know, but
that's what we're contending with.
I'm not certain that American president. I am not certain that an American president can give Russia what it needs in order to end that war. Meaning, the Kellogg plan is what Donald Trump effectively ended up on, not Witkoff's plan. Kellogg's plan. Okay, well, we have to come to some conclusion as to why he ended up with Kellogg's nonsense plan, as opposed to Witkoff saying, "Look, you have to give up the regions. That's the only way you're going to get."
I don't think he's embraced the Kellogg plan yet, because there's no way he can agree to give back all that territory. There's no way. The Russians won't do it. It's a non-starter.
Precisely my point. And yet, that's the plan.
And Witkoff has conceded that.
And yet, that is the plan that Donald Trump was presenting. This kind of modified Kellogg plan, where the U.S. was going to put troops in Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, where European forces were going to be in Ukraine. Like, none of these things were
He hasn't bought into the notion of Europeans being in Ukraine. I haven't heard that. I've heard it proposed,
It's part of the Kellogg plan.
but he hasn't
Peacekeeper.
embraced the Kellogg plan because he
Okay.
knows that Putin will not allow or want NATO or troops from NATO countries in the western part of Ukraine.
So what do you think that Donald Trump gave when he gave his plan? Because he gave a 22-point plan, which was effectively Kellogg's plan modified with European wants as what they were pushing as the peace proposal.
Well, that's why he called in Witkoff because the Kellogg plan was a non-starter. He still has Witkoff going back and forth there.
He does, but Witkoff, okay, fair enough.
Witkoff, you don't see Kellogg meeting with Putin.
I don't see Kellogg meeting with Putin, but I do see.
And you won't.
Right. But whether he meets with Putin or not, what Donald Trump presented as his plan, I mean, you can read it. Hell, it's in Reuters, for God's sake, was a modified Kellogg plan. It wasn't Witkoff's. I mean, they said they would de jure accept the regions where Russia's already said that was a non-starter. What Russia is pushing for is denazification and acknowledgement that these are our regions, which sounds like more of an unconditional surrender. I think they will be open for a deal, but it can't be this notion of, having U.S. troops running Zaporozhye nuclear power plant.
It's not going to happen. Nor European troops, and Europeans can't even afford it anyway. But you're not going to. But Russia clearly is in the driver's seat right now. Witkoff acknowledges that. That's why you're seeing Witkoff continuously going into Moscow, and will continue to do so. And the fact that Trump has not imposed further sanctions, I should say, on Russia. Number one, they wouldn't work anyway. But number two, he was restrained because I think there's more going on behind the scenes, particularly through the Witkoff channel. And there's a dispute between Witkoff and Kellogg. There's a fight along with Rubio. I think some noses were blunted because all of a sudden, instead of the Secretary of State doing that job, you got Witkoff, a real estate guy, called into action to take the lead on this negotiation, and also on the Middle East. So that downgrades Rubio's influence.
Give me your take on merits. Do you think those Taurus missiles are already in Ukraine?
Say that again.
Do you think those Taurus missiles are already in Ukraine?
Probably not, because they're going to require German technical assistance, and I don't think the German government wants to go so far as to have German personnel killed in Ukraine. The German people would revolt because they don't agree with this anyway. It's the elites, Mertz, and for Taurus to go on in, they're all going to get shot down. But it's the principle of the thing. If they want to build a Taurus factory in Ukraine, that's going to be a target. Period.
Well, that's what they said they want to do. That they want to invest.
Yeah, I know, and it's but you see, this explains it all. The Europeans want to continue the war where Trump is trying to establish a peace. So why would he adapt or adopt anything the Europeans want at this stage? Because they want to prolong the war. So that's why this has become very murky. But Putin has remained steadfast in his terms, and he's winning.
See, the problem is the Europeans can always say, well, after the deal, we're going to put troops in, which immediately sets Russia off saying, okay, well, there can be no deal.
Well, that's why there may be a reason why there's probably going to be consideration on the Russian side just to take the rest of Ukraine, to maintain a buffer. Because, if you want to introduce those troops, in effect, you've made it in a de facto NATO part of the West Ukraine, and that defeats the purpose. So he wants to set up a buffer But what constitutes the buffer? The only thing that's going to constitute a buffer at this stage, given those terms of what the Europeans want to do, is take the whole country back.
Do you think there's a point where the Ukrainian military weakens to such a degree where they accept terms? Like, meaning, do you think there is any chance for an unconditional surrender? Or do you think, nope, these guys are lunatics. They're going to go down with the ship and take the ship down with them?
At this stage, it looks like they're going to go down with the ship, because I don't see, maybe some the troops who've been on the front lines would love to have a ceasefire, but you have elements that even defy the Ukrainian government that are within the Ukrainian military, such as the Azov group, that want to prolong this thing. They have their own agenda apart from the government. They want to confront Russia. They want to continue fighting it. So that's why Zelensky can't come to terms with with what he wants to do.
That reminds me. So Ukraine has given apparently their terms for ceasefire, which I don't know if anybody is even going to read. Russia is apparently going to give theirs on Friday. Is there any meeting of the minds in these terms at all, or is this all theater in the way that I think it is?
I don't know. We'll have to see what they come up with in those memoranda of understanding.
Yeah.
Each side is supposed to present, as you say, I think it's on 2 June that they'll present their proposals for a ceasefire. We'll see how they match and mismatch, and in terms of what they want. And I think Russia's been pretty clear what it wants.
They have.
But what will Ukraine go along with any of that? I don't know. I tend to doubt it. Yeah. I think they'll have to concede Crimea. They will. They still have notions of wanting to take back Donbass and Luhansk. That's not going to happen. And in fact, I would imagine that, given this initial exchange of MOUs on terms for a ceasefire, that it will be unacceptable by the Ukrainians, and the Russians will just continue to plow along and take back more territory, probably on a more accelerated basis now, because now they want to, in light of the decision by Merz that they're going to be giving long-range missiles, that means Russia is going to have to create a greater buffer.
Yeah, it's funny. I put that on Twitter too. I was like, oh, 300 kilometers, that means we need a 300-kilometer buffer. I'm curious on what do you think Trump is going to do, though? Do you think Trump is going to say, okay, I think both of you are horrible people. You guys are nuts. I'm calling it a day, and I'm walking.
I think that's ultimately what he's going to come to. And he'll make out his own arrangement with the Russians. And if the Europeans want to prolong the war, it'll be done without U.S. help.
Oh, so
I think it'll be the beginning of the end of NATO.
So you really think that the war is not a hindrance to Trump making a side deal with the Russians?
Right. Yeah.
Is there enough? I mean, there's not going to be political pressure on Donald. If Trump is under political pressure now, and he's still giving money and still selling weapons to Ukraine, wouldn't the pressure be enormous for him not to make a side deal with the Russians with the war still continuing?
Well, I think he has a more geostrategic imperative of what is in the U.S. national interest. Having a strategic relationship with Russia is more in the national strategic interest. There is no national security threat to the U.S. on Ukraine. None.
Agreed.
The same with Iran. None. But but to the Europeans, it's a different story. And if the Europeans want to go at it, and he's made that clear, I mean, that's the direction he seems to be heading. He's going to do what he wants to do with Russia. But if they want to continue doing their thing, it's going to be done without U.S. assistance. But I don't see how they'll be able to go on. They want to continue the war at least until 2030, when they think they're going to have their a renewed industrial base to be able to pump out these weapon systems for Ukraine. I mean, it's suicidal. And we now have, over 2 centuries, we've seen a pattern of behavior by the Europeans where they're continuously fighting these ancient feuds, going back and forth, back and forth. And I don't know that the U.S. wants to be involved in their ancient disputes.
But see, that's the rub with NATO, right?
Yeah.
Like, let me ask you this: if Russia
Well,
said
NATO
very
was
clearly,
created for one thing. That reason dissolved. Now we're not going. Why do we want to fight a third world war that's going to be instigated for the third time by Germany?
I
Why?
agree with you. No, I agree.
Why?
I mean, this was comment Lavrov made, right? Germany is taking itself to ruins.
Well, this is
Um,
exactly what's going on right now, and why do we want to be involved in that? I mean, again, there's a pattern of behavior here throughout all of history, European history, that they just are constantly fighting with one another. Why do we want to get involved in that?
okay,
And that's why he's pushing his economic agenda, thinking that maybe economics, trade, which is much more refined and streamlined today than it was in the 19th century, is more attractive than wanting to engage in war. But they're reverting back. The Europeans are reverting back to 19th century mentality. They can't help themselves.
you're so right. Yeah,
I mean,
you're so right. I don't get it. I was talking to my ex yesterday, and I said,
it's
"You got,"
suicidal. It's suicidal.
I said, "You guys keep starting world wars." And I was like, "You guys keep starting world wars," and I don't know if it's
Sure.
because their history goes back so much longer. Like the U.S. is what 200, 300, 400 years old. Like we're somewhat of a young country.
250, almost 250.
Yeah, as opposed to Europe, where they have like thousands of years of history and these
Hundreds.
old feuds, bad blood. It's like a marriage
At
that you
least
can't get out
at
of.
least a millennial. Yeah.
Yeah,
At
it's
least a
just
thousand years worth. And it goes on and on and on. Look, as an example, very short example, West Ukraine. It used to be part of the Lithuanian Polish Republic.
mhm.
They want that back because they still have speakers, Polish and Lithuanian speakers in those regions in West Ukraine. And the eastern part of Ukraine was all Russian speaking.
That's right.
That's and Russia has now annexed that. Same with Crimea. So, we're reverting back to old historical ties, perhaps back to prior to the Habsburgs period. Come on. I
Oh, you're
mean,
talking
we
about
got
like
to
Tsar
reread history.
Russia. Yeah.
I mean, we got to reread history to understand where we're heading back to or where we are now. And in order to understand the present and the future, we need to know the past.
Do you think Trump ultimately just wants to walk? If he could snap his fingers today,
Oh, I think
if he was
so.
called today,
He's being surrounded by these alligators constantly nipping at him. I think the a coalition of opposition to his policy has formed. Uh, this very anti-Russian coalition of neocons and um, uh, the intelligence community and the mainstream media. They're all coalescing against him. Part of
by
the
the way,
reason, of course, is that he's Trump.
this is true
But
for Joe
part of it,
Biden too. This is true for Joe Biden also. I've seen
well, Biden didn't do anything. He just let him run rapid. That's why we got involved in the wars, in the two wars in the first place in 4 years. How's that happen?
no, I do agree with you. I guess what I'm saying is I saw it with my own eyes at the Biden Putin summit, where Joe Biden in that moment is being a rare moment of conciliatory. And he's sounding very similar to Putin in regards to both of them giving their speeches. And I remember sitting there thinking, I was talking to my boss, I was like, hey, these guys sound very similar. This may, be something good. And he's like, no, it's not. Like he's totally cynical. No, it's not. This is going to be nothing. And it ended up being less than nothing considering the war that eventually took place. But I watched media go after Joe Biden when Joe Biden was trying to be more conciliatory at the podium. And it was like, hey, did you punch Putin in the nose? Hey, did you scream at him? Did you tell him about himself? And it's like, what is a president to do with that, right? Like you're effectively
You got to keep in mind how much the mainstream media is an instrument of the deep state and particularly the intelligence community.
yeah.
They're a major instrument. That's why I go back to the example of just a few days ago on the tarmac. That the fact that Trump was not informed about something very critical in that equation of why there was that exchange, He should have been informed, and he wasn't. And he was making decisions based upon what he knew at the time, and that's dangerous.
Does Trump really believe that Russia thinks he's a mediator as opposed to a party to the conflict?
No,
Who can't
I think
believe
it's
that?
gotten to the point they don't trust Trump anymore because he flip flops so much. Calling, the other day, I think it was the crowning glory when he was thinking that maybe Putin was crazy for launching those missiles. He basically accused Putin of being crazy, and so it got increasingly personal.
Yeah.
And I think that now Moscow does not trust Trump any longer because they
I'm
don't
glad.
think he has. You know why? Because they don't think he has control of his own house.
Yeah. And he doesn't.
No,
When
he
Moscow
doesn't.
speaks, they speak in one voice. Even Medvedev he may be more boisterous, but he's not saying anything different than Putin or Lavrov or any of these other people say.
Well, he's always
Whereas,
been the bad cop while Putin's been the good cop, but now the two are
right.
coming together.
One last point before I let you go. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So I've been seeing in Russian media statements like this. Senior criminal aide Yuri Yushikov has said that the POTUS is poorly being advised on Ukraine. Trump makes
That's my
many
point.
statements. Moscow monitors them. Trump still fails to understand that Russia only strikes military infrastructure targets. It appears that Trump is not being informed about Ukraine's terrorist attacks against Russian cities. And it's not just him saying that. There are multiple people who have been saying that coming from the Russian side. Give me your take on this. They're trying to help him save face. And what I mean by save face is,
Well, they want Trump to succeed because he's the only one who has at least admitted that why this war started. It wasn't just an overnight fling on the part of Putin, that there was a buildup over time with NATO expansion, and Trump has acknowledged that. For the Russians, that's quite an achievement, and
yeah,
it's historically accurate. But this is what I was alluding to, not alluding, I was saying that with that tarmac revelation, that's what the special advisor to Putin was referring to, that he didn't have complete information on which to make statements and judgments. And that's a very serious thing. And once again, I think it comes right out of the DNI. Why isn't the DNI reporting that? Because 80 to 90% of the DNI is CIA infiltrated by staff. They're all seconded over to Tulsi Gabbard's staff. And there's no way you're going to clean them out.
Wow.
They need to eliminate that office altogether.
Well, a lot of people, myself included, by the way, thought Tulsi would be a great addition to the team.
No, she's fine. It's the people who surrounds her too. They're all surrounded. They're boxing. They're trying to contain the people who are opposed to the way of thinking of the deep state. So they've contained them, but then they slow roll them when it comes to any decision making or any policy direction that they want to follow. They're always going to throw obstacles in the way. I recall years ago when James Woolsey was CIA director under Clinton. Mm-hmm. I had a conversation with him, and he said to me, he says, "I'm very frustrated in this job." He says, "The DDO, the director of operations, are constantly throwing obstacles in the way of any decisions I want made, and I can't get anything done." And he says, and Clinton has only allowed me to come in to brief him 3 times. And he says that helicopter that helicopter that crashed into the White House years ago, the joke was that was Woolsey trying to get a 4th appointment into the White House.
John mentioned that. I didn't know that Al Gore was getting those meetings, but Bill Clinton only took 3.
Yeah.
Oh, that is amazing to me. Like, I had the notion that the president, quote unquote, leader of the free world, who has his nose into everything, gets 3 briefings is astonishing.
Well, he had his nose somewhere, but it wasn't in intelligence.
That is true. That is true. Michael Maloof, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate these conversations.
Thank you.
Michael Maloof, he is former Chief Security Policy Analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense, but would not pick up the phone if Donald Trump calls him to serve his country.
I don't
You have a
answer
good
phone
one, man.
calls I don't recognize.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You have a good
All
one.
right.
You be safe, all right?
Yeah, you too. Thank you.